A powerful white dog stands rigid, its muscles tensed beneath battle-scarred skin. Blood drips from a fresh gash on its shoulder as 5 coyotes circle menacingly. Behind the dog, wrapped in a blanket atop fallen leaves, lies a whimpering infant. The massive Dogo Argentino bares its teeth and lunges forward with explosive force, sending 2 coyotes scattering while a third catches the full impact of the dog's powerful jaws. The infant's cries pierce as the battle for survival unfolds in the gathering dusk. Before we continue, if you enjoy incredible true animal rescue stories, make sure to click that subscribe button. This is the best way for you to support our work. Thank you very much, and let's continue. Autumn had settled over the rural outskirts of Pine Ridge County, painting the landscape in fiery hues of orange and gold. The mornings carried a crisp bite, and nights arrived earlier with each passing day. For most residents, it was a time of harvest celebrations and preparing for the coming winter. But for one creature, the changing season marked yet another chapter in a life of constant vigilance and survival. The massive white dog that locals occasionally glimpsed moving through the forest edge had no name, at least none that humans used. Some called him the White Ghost or Forest Guardian, but these were merely labels assigned by those who rarely saw more than a flash of his powerful form disappearing into the underbrush. What nobody knew was that the Dogo Argentino had once been called Atlas, a name given by the breeder who had sold him to a wealthy hunter 3 years earlier. Atlas had been bred for hunting wild boar, his powerful body, unmatched courage, and protective instincts making him perfect for the dangerous sport. For the first 2 years of his life, he had lived in relative comfort, though his days were filled with rigorous training and occasional brutal hunts. His owner, a man named Victor Delgado, had prized him above all his other hunting dogs. But when financial troubles had come calling, Victor had been forced to sell his rural property and move to the city. Unable to keep Atlas in his small apartment and unwilling to sell such a valuable dog for less than top dollar, Victor had made a decision that would forever change the course of Atlas's life. One cold night, he had driven Atlas to the edge of the national forest, 20 miles from the nearest town, and simply let him go. Atlas had stood confused, watching his master's truck disappear down the dirt road, the taste of the last pat on his head still fresh in his memory. He had waited there, loyal to a fault, for 3 days before hunger and thirst had forced him to accept his abandonment and begin forging a new life in the wilderness. That had been nearly a year ago. Atlas had survived through instinct, intelligence, and the physical gifts that made Dogo Argentinos such formidable hunters. He had established a territory at the border between the national forest and a scattering of rural properties, avoiding humans when possible, but occasionally accepting food left by compassionate souls who glimpsed his solitary patrols. Among those who had noticed the majestic white dog was Sarah Martinez, a wildlife photographer who had recently moved to a small cabin at the forest edge to work on a book about local fauna. Sarah had first spotted Atlas 6 months earlier while photographing deer at dawn. The dog had appeared silently at the forest edge, watching her with intelligent eyes before melting back into the trees. Since then, she had occasionally left food for him, though he never approached while she was present. What Sarah didn't know was that Atlas had begun to consider her cabin part of his territory. Each night he made a silent circuit of the perimeter, his acute senses alert for any threats. Though he avoided human contact, something about the quiet woman with the cameras had awakened a protective instinct in him. Perhaps it was the gentle way she spoke when leaving food, or maybe it was simply that she asked nothing of him in return. On this particular October morning, Sarah had risen before dawn to drive to a nearby town for supplies. Her sister Marisol was visiting with her 7-month-old daughter Eleanor, and Sarah wanted to stock up on baby supplies before the weekend. As she loaded her truck, she spoke softly to Marisol, who stood in the doorway with Eleanor on her hip. "I should be back by noon," Sarah said, closing the truck door. "Are you sure you'll be okay? There's plenty of food in the fridge, and I left that list of emergency contacts on the counter." Marisol laughed, bouncing Elena gently. "We'll be fine, Sarah. This little one and I are going to enjoy some quiet time. Maybe take a walk if the weather holds." Go do your errands, we're not helpless." Sarah smiled, though a hint of worry remained in her eyes. Her cabin was isolated, the nearest neighbor nearly a mile away. But Marisol was right. They would be fine for a few hours. With a final wave, she drove away, unaware that her departure had been observed by watchful eyes from the forest edge. Atlas had witnessed the exchange from his position among the trees. He had grown familiar with Sarah's routines but was wary of the newcomers who had arrived 2 days earlier. The sound of the baby's cries had initially alarmed him, but he had gradually understood that this small creature was part of the human family. Still, he kept his distance, continuing his silent guardianship from afar. The morning passed quietly. Inside the cabin, Marisol fed Elena, then settled her down for a nap. As the baby slept, Marisol busied herself with her laptop, catching up on work emails. By mid-morning, feeling restless from days of being indoors, she decided that a short walk would do them both good. The autumn day was perfect, crisp and clear, with sunlight filtering through the colorful canopy overhead. Bundling Elena in a blanket and securing her in a front-carrying baby sling, Marisol stepped outside. She inhaled deeply, appreciating the scent of fallen leaves and pine. Rather than sticking to the graveled driveway, she decided to follow a well-worn path that skirted the edge of the forest. Sarah had mentioned it was an easy walk, with beautiful views of a small meadow about a quarter-mile from the cabin. Unknown to Marisol, the territory she was entering had recently become contested ground. A particularly harsh early freeze had pushed a pack of coyotes down from the higher elevations, forcing them to expand their hunting range. For 3 nights, Atlas had engaged in territorial displays, keeping the hungry pack at bay. But coyotes are adaptive, intelligent predators, and the scent of humans, particularly the unfamiliar scent of an infant, had piqued their interest and desperation. Marisol walked slowly, pointing out birds and squirrels to Elena, who gurgled happily from her carrier. The path curved gently, and soon the cabin was no longer visible behind them. The meadow appeared ahead, bathed in autumn sunlight, scattered wildflowers still defying the season's change. "Look at that, Elena," Marisol whispered, stepping into the clearing. "Isn't it beautiful?" Aunt Sarah was right. She found a fallen log at the meadow's edge and sat down, adjusting Elena in her carrier. The baby had begun to fuss slightly, and Marisol figured she might be getting hungry again. Reaching into her small backpack, she retrieved a bottle of formula she had prepared before leaving the cabin. That's when she heard it, a rustling sound from the brush to her left, followed by what sounded like low growling. Marisol froze, the bottle halfway to Elena's mouth. She scanned the forest edge, her heart suddenly pounding. Living in the city all her life, she had little experience with wild animals and had naively assumed that dangerous predators would stay deep in the forest, away from human habitation. A flicker of movement caught her eye, and then she saw it. A coyote, lean and hungry-looking, emerging partially from the underbrush. Marisol's breath caught in her throat as she realized with horror that there were others. At least 4 or 5 shapes moving in the shadows behind the first. Her mind raced. The cabin was too far away to reach quickly, especially with Elena strapped to her chest. Screaming would likely do nothing but potentially agitate the animals further. The closest neighbor was too far to hear a call for help, and in her panic, she realized she had left her cell phone charging on the kitchen counter. The first coyote took a tentative step forward, emboldened by the scent of the baby and the obvious fear emanating from Marisol. She clutched Elena tighter, rising slowly to her feet, her eyes never leaving the predator. The movement seemed to trigger something in the pack, and 2 more coyotes emerged fully from the brush, their intentions clear in their focused approach. Marisol began backing away slowly, fighting against the urge to turn and run. She had heard somewhere that running would only trigger a chase response. Eleanor, sensing her mother's fear, began to cry, the sound cutting through the tense silence of the meadow. The lead coyote lowered its head, muscles tensing in preparation to lunge. Marisol felt the world narrowing to this moment, to the desperate need to protect her child with no means of defense at hand. She reached down, groping blindly for a stick, a rock, anything that might serve as a weapon. Then, Like a phantom materializing from nothing, a blur of white erupted from the forest to her right. The massive dog moved with astonishing speed, positioning itself between Marisol and the advancing coyotes. The Dogo Argentino's appearance was so sudden, so unexpected, that both Marisol and the coyotes seemed momentarily frozen in surprise. Atlas stood rigid, his powerful muscles tensed. Beneath, battle-scarred skin. Fresh wounds from previous territorial fights were visible on his white coat, but he showed no sign of weakness. His focus was absolute, his stance communicating a clear message to the coyotes. They would not pass. The standoff lasted only seconds before the lead coyote recovered from its surprise and lunged forward. Atlas met the challenge with explosive force, his powerful jaws closing around the attacker's neck. The coyote yelped in pain and surprise as Atlas flung it aside, immediately repositioning to face the rest of the pack. Marisol stood transfixed, clutching Elena to her chest as the battle unfolded before her. The massive white dog moved with surprising agility, using his superior weight and strength to counter the coyote's speed and numbers. Two of the pack circled around, attempting to flank the Dogo, but Atlas seemed to anticipate every move, spinning and charging to maintain his protective position in front of the woman and child. Blood now stained Atlas's white coat from fresh wounds, but the Dogo showed no signs of relenting. The determined defense began to take its toll on the coyote pack. Used to hunting weaker prey, they were unprepared for the ferocity and tactical intelligence of the battle-hardened dog. After several more clashes that left two of their members limping and injured, the pack began to retreat, slinking back into the forest with reluctant growls. As suddenly as it had begun, the confrontation was over. The meadow fell silent except for Elena's continued cries and Atlas's heavy breathing. The Dogo remained vigilant, scanning the forest edge for any sign of the coyote's return. Only when he was certain the threat had passed did he finally turn, his attention to Marisol and the baby. Marisol stood frozen, unsure whether her situation had improved or merely changed form. The dog before her was massive, powerful, and clearly capable of inflicting terrible damage. But something in his demeanor, in the intelligent eyes that assessed her calmly, told her that he meant no harm. "Good dog," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Thank you. Good dog." Atlas maintained his distance, still alert for any sound from the forest. Blood trickled from a gash on his shoulder and several smaller wounds on his flanks, but he showed no sign of pain. His priority remained clear, ensuring the safety of the human and her young. Marisol knew she needed to get back to the cabin. The coyotes might return, and while the white dog had proven a formidable defender, he was injured and outnumbered. Moving slowly, still facing Atlas, she began to back away toward the path to the cabin. To her surprise, the dog seemed to understand her intention. He moved parallel to her, keeping himself between her and the forest where the coyotes had disappeared. It was as if he was escorting them, providing protection for their retreat. The journey back to the cabin seemed endless, though it couldn't have taken more than 10 minutes. Marisol walked backward half the time, unwilling to turn her back on either the potential threat of returning coyotes or the powerful dog that had saved them. Elena had quieted somewhat, exhausted from crying, and now whimpered softly against her mother's chest. When they finally reached the cabin's clearing, Marisol nearly sobbed with relief. She hurried to the porch and fumbled with the door handle, keeping one eye on the white dog, who had stopped at the edge of the yard. Once inside, she quickly locked the door and collapsed onto the sofa, cradling Elena close as the adrenaline began to ebb, leaving her shaking. Through the window, she could see the white dog still standing guard at the forest edge. Despite her fear and shock, she felt a surge of gratitude toward the animal. Without his intervention, she couldn't bear to think what might have happened to her and Elena. Picking up her phone, Marisol called Sarah with trembling fingers, the words tumbling out in a rushed emotional account of what had happened. Sarah listened in horror and told Marisol she was turning around immediately and would be home within 30 minutes. While waiting for her sister's return, Marisol kept watching the white dog through the window. He had settled into a sitting position at the forest edge, still vigilant, still guarding. Despite his injuries, he made no move to leave. It was as if he had appointed himself their protector and would not abandon his post. When Sarah's truck finally roared up the driveway, the dog stood alert but did not flee. Sarah rushed inside, embracing her sister and niece, her face pale with worry. After assuring herself they were unharmed, she moved to the window and looked out at the white sentinel. "That's him," she said softly. "The dog I've been telling you about, the one I've been leaving food for. He saved our lives, Sarah," Marisol said, joining her at the window. "Those coyotes were going to attack us. I'm sure of it. And he just appeared out of nowhere, fought them off. He's injured, though. Look at the blood on his coat." Sarah's expression shifted from concern to determination. "Wait here," she said, moving to the kitchen. She returned moments later with a bowl of water and some leftover roast beef from dinner the previous night. Slowly, she opened the front door and placed the offerings on the porch. "He won't come near while we're watching," she explained, stepping back inside. "He never has. But maybe now." They retreated from the window, moving deeper into the living room, where they could observe without being obvious. For several long minutes, the white dog remained at his post, occasionally scanning the forest edge. Then, seemingly satisfied that no threat remained, he cautiously approached the porch. His movements revealed the pain of his injuries, but his alertness never wavered. At the porch steps, he paused, lifting his nose to catch their scent. Then, with careful dignity, he climbed the steps and began to drink thirstily from the water bowl. After slaking his thirst, he consumed the meat in a few quick bites, his eyes constantly moving between the forest and the cabin door. "He needs veterinary care," Sarah said softly. "Those wounds could get infected. But how do we help an animal that won't let us near him?" The question hung in the air unanswered as they watched the dog finish his meal and return to his guard post at the edge of the property. As darkness began to fall, Marisol recounted the attack in greater detail, and Sarah called the local ranger station to report the unusually aggressive coyote behavior. The ranger promised to investigate, but warned that with limited resources, it might be a few days before they could patrol the area. That night, the sisters took turns keeping watch, checking the perimeter of the cabin with a powerful flashlight every hour. And each time they found the white dog still there, maintaining his silent vigil despite his injuries. By morning, Sarah had made a decision. "I'm going to try to get him into my truck and take him to the vet in town," she announced, over coffee. "Those wounds need treatment, and after what he did for you and Eleanor, it's the least we can do." "How?" Marisol asked, bouncing Elena gently on her knee. "He won't let you anywhere near him." Sarah sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I don't know, but I have to try." After breakfast, Sarah prepared a more substantial offering: chicken, rice, and even some of the premium dog food she had started buying weeks ago in hopes of improving the stray's diet. She placed it all in a large bowl and added a mild sedative the local vet had given her months ago when she had first mentioned the white stray to him. "It won't hurt him," she assured Marisol, who looked concerned. "Just make him drowsy enough that we might be able to get him into the truck. It's for his own good." But when they placed the doctored food on the porch, the dog approached, sniffed carefully, and then simply lay down beside it, making no move to eat. It was as if he sensed their intention, or perhaps the unfamiliar scent of the medication had warned him away. "He's too smart," Marisol said, a hint of admiration in her voice. Sarah nodded, disappointment evident in her expression. "We need to try something else." The opportunity came later that afternoon when a sudden autumn downpour erupted, sending sheets of rain cascading from the darkened sky. The white dog, still maintaining his post despite the weather, was soon soaked to the skin. Sarah watched from the window as he finally sought shelter under the broad branches of a pine tree near the cabin. "This might be our chance," she said. "He's cold, wet, and injured. Maybe..." Moving quickly, she opened the cabin's small mudroom that connected to the garage, leaving both the garage door and the mudroom door slightly ajar. Then she placed a fresh bowl of food, without sedatives this time, just inside the garage and retreated to watch from a window. For nearly an hour, nothing happened. The rain continued its assault, and the white dog remained under the pine tree, occasionally shaking his coat but showing no inclination to seek better shelter. Then, as the daylight began to fade and the temperature dropped further, he finally rose and cautiously approached the garage. Sarah and Marisol held their breath as he paused at the open door, clearly torn between hunger and suspicion. After what seemed an eternity, hunger and the promise of warmth won out. The dog slipped inside the garage, moving directly to the food bowl. "Now," Sarah whispered, and Marisol pressed the remote control that slowly closed the garage door. The sound immediately alerted the dog, who spun around, but it was too late. The door had closed completely, trapping him inside. They heard a series of frantic scratches and a low, anxious whine that tore at their hearts. "Let me try to calm him," Sarah said, moving toward the mudroom door. "You stay here with Elena." Marisol nodded, clutching her daughter close as Sarah took a deep breath and carefully opened the door to the garage. The scene that met her was both pitiful and alarming. The powerful dog, now cornered, had retreated to the farthest wall of the garage. His eyes were wide with fear, his body trembling, not from cold but from terror. In that moment, Sarah realized that whatever traumas this animal had suffered at human hands had left deep scars, both physical and emotional. Instead of approaching, she sat down on the floor of the mudroom, keeping the door open behind her. Then, in a soft, even voice, she began to speak. "It's okay, boy, no one's going to hurt you. You saved my family today, and now we want to help you. Those wounds need cleaning. You need food and proper shelter. We're not going to hurt you." For nearly 20 minutes, she continued this gentle monologue, occasionally sliding a treat across the floor toward the frightened animal. Gradually, his trembling subsided, though he remained pressed against the wall, watching her with wary eyes. "That's it," she coaxed. "Good boy. Such a brave, good boy." Another hour passed this way, with Sarah patiently building trust through her presence and soft words. Finally, exhaustion, injury, and perhaps some innate understanding that her intentions were good, led the dog to cautiously accept a treat directly from her outstretched hand. Progress after that came in small increments. By nightfall, Sarah had managed to examine some of his wounds by flashlight, though he still wouldn't allow her to touch them. She had placed blankets in the corner of the garage, which he eventually settled onto, his eyes fighting to stay open as fatigue overcame wariness. "I'll sleep out here with him tonight," Sarah told Marisol when she came to check on their progress. "In the morning, we'll try to get him to the vet." That night marked a turning point. Whether it was Sarah's patient kindness, the relief of safe shelter, or simply the exhaustion of his injuries, the white dog finally surrendered to sleep while Sarah kept a gentle vigil nearby. By morning, something fundamental had shifted in their relationship. When she offered him fresh water, he drank while allowing her hand to rest lightly on his massive head. Getting him into the truck proved less challenging than anticipated. Sarah laid a trail of food leading up the ramp she used for transporting her photography equipment, and though hesitant, the dog eventually followed, settling uneasily in the truck bed where Sarah had prepared a nest of blankets. The local veterinarian, Dr. Chen, had opened his clinic early at Sarah's urgent call. When they arrived, he helped Sarah coax the nervous animal inside and into an examination room. The dog's demeanor had changed again. In this unfamiliar environment full of strange scents, his anxiety returned, and he pressed himself against Sarah's legs as if seeking reassurance. "He's bonded with you," Dr. Chen observed as he carefully approached. "That's remarkable for a stray, especially one that's clearly been on his own for some time." The examination revealed the extent of the dog's injuries. Besides the fresh wounds from the coyote encounter, his body told a story of hard survival. Old scars, evidence of previous fights, and signs of past malnutrition now improving, thanks to Sarah's regular offerings of food. "He's a Dogo Argentino," Dr. Chen confirmed, gently cleaning the deepest gash on the dog's shoulder. "Purebred, from what I can tell. These dogs were bred for hunting dangerous game. Extremely loyal, brave to the point of recklessness sometimes, and fiercely protective of their families. Someone invested a lot of money in this animal before abandoning him." "Can you tell how long he's been on his own?" Sarah asked, stroking the dog's head as Dr. Chen administered a local anesthetic to suture the worst wounds. Based on the condition of the older scars and how feral his behavior was according to your description, I'd say at least 6 months. Probably longer. He's young though, maybe 3 years old. And despite everything, he's basically healthy. You've been feeding him well. As Dr. Chen worked, he scanned for a microchip and found one. The information led to a breeder in Argentina, and subsequently to a man named Victor Delgado, whose phone number was no longer in service. A quick database search showed that Delgado had declared bankruptcy 11 months earlier and had moved out of state. His name is Atlas, Dr. Chen said, reading from the microchip information. Fitting for such a strong guardian, isn't it? Sarah looked down at the dog, who was now resting his head in her lap, tolerating Dr. Chen's ministrations with stoic patience. Atlas, she repeated softly, and the dog's ears perked, slightly at the sound of his name. It suits him. For the next hour, Dr. Chen cleaned and treated Atlas's wounds, administered vaccines and parasite prevention, and gave Sarah detailed instructions for his aftercare. By the time they were finished, Atlas was walking more comfortably, the pain medication taking effect. "What will you do with him now?" Dr. Chen asked as they prepared to leave. "He's a special animal, but dogos aren't for everyone. They need experienced handling, plenty of exercise, and clear boundaries." Sarah hesitated. She hadn't thought beyond getting Atlas the medical care he needed. Her life as a wildlife photographer meant frequent travel, sometimes for weeks at a time. A dog, especially one with Atlas's history and needs, would significantly complicate her lifestyle. "I don't know," she admitted. "I can't just turn him over to a shelter, not after what he did for my sister and niece, and especially not now that he's beginning to trust me." Dr. Chen nodded understandingly. "Give it some thought. He can stay here for a few days while his wounds begin to heal, if that helps. But Sarah," he paused, his expression serious, "if you do decide to take him in, you need to understand what you're committing to. This dog has already suffered one abandonment. I don't think he'd recover from another." The weight of the decision followed Sarah home, where Marisol and Elena were waiting anxiously for news. When Sarah explained the situation, Marisol's response was immediate and passionate. "Of course you have to keep him," she insisted. "He's already chosen you as his person, Sarah, and after what he did for us, he's family now." Sarah ran a hand through her hair, a gesture her sister recognized as a sign of stress. "It's not that simple. My work, the traveling, it wouldn't be fair to him." "Then change how you work," Marisol challenged. "Take shorter assignments, hire an assistant, find a good dog sitter for when you absolutely must travel. There are solutions, Sarah, if you want to find them." The conversation continued late into the night, with Marisol eventually revealing that her sudden visit hadn't been merely for pleasure. She had recently separated from her husband and was considering relocating permanently, possibly to somewhere near Sarah. The idea of sharing the cabin, at least temporarily, emerged as a potential solution to both their situations. Marisol needed a fresh start, and Atlas needed consistent care and companionship. "We could help each other," Marisol suggested. "I could watch Atlas when you travel for work. You could help with Elena, and honestly, after what happened in the meadow, I'd feel safer having him here." By morning, a tentative plan had taken shape. Marisol would stay at the cabin for at least the next month while she sorted out her future. Sarah would adjust her work schedule to include more local assignments, and together, they would welcome Atlas into their home, giving the loyal dog the family he had been denied. 3 days later, they brought Atlas home from the veterinary clinic. His physical recovery had been remarkable, testament to his resilient nature. The emotional journey, however, would take longer. Though he had begun to trust Sarah, and to a lesser extent Marisol, he remained wary of sudden movements and loud noises. The trauma of abandonment had left invisible scars that would take patience and consistent kindness to heal. They established a routine that respected Atlas's boundaries while gradually expanding his comfort zone. Sarah converted a corner of the living room into his own space, with a comfortable bed and toys, but they soon discovered he preferred to sleep near the front door, as if still maintaining his self-appointed guardianship. The first week passed, in a series of small, significant moments, Atlas accepting a gentle stroke along his back without flinching, the first time he took food directly from Marisol's hand. The morning Sarah awoke to find him not at his usual post by the door, but stretched out beside her bed, relaxed in sleep. Perhaps most touching was his interaction with baby Eleanor. From the first day home, Atlas showed a special gentleness around the infant. He would position himself near her playmat, watching with attentive eyes. When she cried, he would approach Marisol or Sarah with an expectant look, as if alerting them to the baby's distress. "It's like he knows she's the most vulnerable. One of us," Marisol observed one evening, as Atlas lay with his head resting near Eleanor's playpen, his eyes following the baby's every movement. As autumn deepened toward winter, changes came to the small household. Marisol decided to make her stay permanent, finding remote work that allowed her to remain at the cabin. Sarah adjusted her photography assignments, focusing more on local wildlife and taking fewer long-distance commissions. And Atlas continued his transformation from feral survivor to beloved family member, though he never lost the alertness and protective instinct that had saved Marisol and Elena in the meadow. Word of his heroism spread through the small community. The local newspaper ran a feature story about the stray Dogo Argentino, who had fought off coyotes to protect a baby, complete with photographs Sarah had taken showing Atlas's dignified profile. The article included information about responsible pet ownership and the cruelty of abandonment, with a sidebar about local animal rescue organizations. The story caught the attention of a regional news outlet, and soon reporters were calling for interviews. Sarah and Marisol agreed to a single television appearance, hoping to raise awareness about animal abandonment. The day of the interview, they brought Atlas to the local television studio, unsure how he would handle the unfamiliar environment and people. To their surprise, Atlas conducted himself with remarkable poise. Though clearly uncomfortable with the cameras and lights, he remained calm beside Sarah, his white coat gleaming under the studio lights, the healing scars visible evidence of his bravery. The segment aired the following week and quickly went viral online, with viewers captivated by the powerful image of the noble dog who had risked his life to save a child he had no reason to protect. What happened next took everyone by surprise. Emails and letters began arriving at the television station, which forwarded them to Sarah and Marisol. People from across the country were reaching out, moved by Atlas's story. Many shared their own experiences with rescued animals. Others offered donations toward his ongoing care. A premium pet food company sent a year's supply of food and proposed featuring Atlas in an upcoming advertising campaign. But the most unexpected communication came from a woman named Lucia Delgado, who had seen the story while visiting relatives in the United States. In halting English, she explained that she was Victor Delgado's sister and had been devastated to learn that her brother had abandoned Atlas when financial troubles forced him to move. "I tried to find Atlas when I learned what my brother had done," she wrote, "but by then months had passed and there was no trace of him. I've never stopped looking, checking shelters and rescue organizations. When I saw your story, I knew immediately it was him. The scar above his right eye, he got that as a puppy. Chasing a wild pig during training." Sarah read the email aloud to Marisol, both of them glancing at Atlas, who was dozing in a patch of sunlight near Elena's playpen. "She wants him back," Marisol said, her voice tight with emotion. "Doesn't she?" Sarah continued reading. "I want you to know that Atlas was loved. My brother made a terrible choice in a desperate moment, a choice he has regretted every day since. I am not writing to reclaim Atlas. He has found his true home with you, and after what he has endured, moving him again would be cruel. I simply wanted you to know that before he came into your life, there were people who loved him too. If you are willing, I would like to visit someday to see for myself that he is happy and well." The letter opened an unexpected channel of healing. Over the following months, Lucia and Sarah corresponded regularly. Through Lucia's stories, they learned about Atlas's early life, how he had been the strongest, most intelligent puppy in his litter, how he had shown extraordinary courage even in training. She sent photographs of him as a puppy, images that Sarah and Marisol treasured, filling in the blanks of their beloved companion's history. 6 months after the coyote attack, as spring brought new life to the forest around the cabin, Lucia visited. The moment was tense. Would Atlas remember her? Would her presence trigger painful memories of his abandonment? When Lucia stepped from the rental car, Atlas was standing beside Sarah on the porch. His posture stiffened, his ears alert. A long moment. He stared at the visitor, motionless except for the slight tilt of his head, as if processing a long-forgotten scent. Lucia stopped at the foot of the porch steps, tears streaming down her face. "Atlas," she said softly, the name carrying years of memory. The dog looked up at Sarah as if seeking permission or reassurance, then slowly descended the steps. When he reached Lucia, he sniffed her outstretched hand cautiously before pressing his head against it, a gesture of recognition and perhaps forgiveness. That evening, as they shared a meal on the porch, watching Atlas and Elena play in the yard, the massive dog incredibly gentle with the now toddling child, Lucia spoke of her brother. "Victor is doing better now," she said. "He has steady work, a small apartment that would allow pets. When he saw the news story about Atlas, he cried for hours. He wanted to come himself, to apologize, but I told him it might be too confusing for Atlas." Sarah nodded, understanding the complexity of the situation. "Maybe someday, when Atlas is more secure. It's only been a year since we found each other." The conversation shifted to the future, to plans for expanding the cabin to accommodate their growing unconventional family, to Sarah's upcoming book of wildlife photography that would feature Atlas prominently, to Lucia's offer to visit annually, bringing news and maintaining the connection that had been so unexpectedly restored. As twilight settled over the forest, Atlas completed his customary patrol of the property before returning to the porch. He settled at Sarah's feet, his mission fulfilled, safe in the knowledge that his territory and his family were secure for another night. In the year since that fateful day in the meadow, Atlas had journeyed from abandoned pet to wild survivor to cherished family member. His story had touched thousands, raising awareness about animal abandonment and inspiring donations to rescue organizations across the country. The scars that marked his powerful body had faded, just as the invisible wounds of betrayal had begun to heal through the patient love of his new family. And in that healing, Atlas had offered healing in return. For Marisol, finding the strength to build a new life after a failed marriage. For Sarah, learning to balance her passion for work with the deeper connections of family. For little Elena, growing up with a constant, vigilant guardian whose devotion would shape her understanding of loyalty and courage. As darkness fell completely, the family moved inside, Atlas taking his customary position near the door. But later that night, as Sarah passed through the living room for a glass of water, she found the dog had moved. He was stretched out beside Elena's crib, his eyes half closed but alert, the eternal guardian watching over the smallest, most vulnerable member of his pack. Sarah knelt beside him, running her hand along his muscular flank. "Thank you," she whispered, words she had spoken countless times over the past year, a gratitude that could never be fully expressed. Atlas turned his noble head toward her, his dark eyes reflecting the depth of understanding that had made this extraordinary bond possible. In that quiet moment, something profound passed between them, an acknowledgement of the journey they had shared and the promise of the path ahead, walking together.